Welcome to Real Talk, where we explore the latest street topics and events that take place within the communities, and we look at what's happening and we explore why. Today we have a special guest joining us. It's Joanna. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a few questions. First one is, straight away, let's get into it. Why do you feel that young people carry knives, and do you feel that there's a rise in violence in London, and why?
If I start with do I think there's been a rise in violence? I mean, there has been a rise in violent crime, especially knife crime, in the last few years. And from all the different players within government, communities, police that I've spoken to, it all kind of comes down. There's lots of reasons why this is happening. There's no like one answer, but within all those different reasons, there's the same theme of neglect. And that's not just neglect in terms of people not really getting what they need, but also kind of avoidance of the problem itself. And with the kind of view that this issue only happens within certain communities, which is a false view, I think it's easier to then ignore that people have needs within those different groups. I need to do all that again.
That's fantastic.
It's not fantastic.
And it's on zero. Do you feel that racism still exists within our society? Examples like overrepresentation of young black males within the media, within the criminal justice system, stop and search, etc.
Yeah, I think it's like pretty evident that racism is still like a major deciding factor in terms of policing, in terms of like profiling some young communities over other communities, and that kind of trickles even higher into access to certain services, certain jobs, certain professions. And if, you know, I feel like, obviously, like speaking as like a white person, it's not the same kind of
Do you feel that there's a difference because of the colour of skin?
Yeah, I think there is a difference in the way people are viewed, but I think it's like going beyond just race, but also class and where people are from and how people speak and what life experiences people have had aren't really like valued or weighed or given the same weight. And if like young kids aren't seeing people that look like them in those structures, then not only do they not think they're going to be in those structures, but they're not going to respect those structures when they're telling them what to do. So yeah, I think it's a huge issue in the UK.
I mean, you really touched on some really fantastic, interesting points. One of them being class and life experiences not being valued or weighed in comparison to maybe ethnicity, gender, and all the other things. How do you think we tackle that? Can we tackle that?
I think it's like really complicated because sure there's like schemes for people to, you know, to come from different backgrounds or different paths to get into certain professions, but there's definitely a problem when they kind of finish those schemes of like how they continue or how they'd like move up the chain, and when you've still got the same types of people in those positions of power, you're only really going to get those kids to go so far. And also there's a danger that when you've got a lot of people in power that have all got the same worldview, they're only ever going to view those kids that have come through other ways as being kind of like tokenistic, and not really like seeing them as equal to the structures that are already in place.
Do you feel that parents are to blame? I mean, there's been lots of speculation around poor parental supervision, parents having an influence, being responsible. Do you feel and agree that it's a true statement, or what's your views on parents and parenting?
I mean, parents just like do what they can, right? They like do what they feel is best for their kid, and if you don't have the support in place to allow that to happen, like whether you're working like really long hours or maybe like you didn't want to have a child at that point and you're in that situation, I think it's like quite easy to blame like the only kind of caregiver that might be there. I think like what's really missing is someone that's that's not a parent, that's not a teacher, that's not a police officer, who is able to be like a kind of trusted figure like within that child's life, so that if there is stuff going on, they can kind of talk to that person without feeling like they're going to get into trouble. Yeah.
Do you feel the government and police have a part to play? Do you feel that the government could be doing more and the police service could be doing more in terms of how they handle members of young men from ethnic minority communities?
I think, like, and this has been like an ongoing discussion, that there's a lot of lip service paid to knife-free schemes or like crime reduction, but all the kind of arguments are known. We know that like violence is really traumatising for a child, but there doesn't really seem to be anything that's tangible that actually helps those kids that have been traumatised. And I think there's a bit of a danger at the moment for government to act on what's sort of spoken as being this narrative of how to respond to a problem, without really putting those like solutions in place.
Do you feel that there are any solutions, or do you feel that there's any solutions or early interventions that we could put in place that could stop this, that could effectively help tackle or minimalise crime within London?
I think, like, yeah, as I've said about the person that's not, I'll do that again in case you don't use the as I've said bit. I think, yeah, having this extra person for a young person to be able to trust is kind of key in that, because from like young people I've spoken to that have lost their friend like to knife crime, they might have known that that kid was kind of getting involved with like gangs or just like having a hard time, but like who would that kid tell? And I think that's like, yeah, that's what's kind of missing. You're not going to turn to your parents, you can't turn to the police, then if there's no other structures there, then you're just kind of left. And
you can almost feel isolated and feel socially excluded, which brings me on to my next and final last question. I was watching, say, you know, politicians, young people especially, that are caught up in gangs, trying to leave gangs, trying to find their way in life, parents, police officers, teachers. What message would you have for young people watching this right now?
I think just like, if those support services aren't there, just make sure that you're surrounding yourself with people that love you and have your best interests at heart, whether that's like good mates or like neighbours or like other family members. And if people are kind of, yeah, don't have your best interests at heart, then yeah, probably aren't good for you.
And for young girls that are maybe in a bad relationship, making bad choices or bad decisions, maybe a younger version of you, what would you say to them?
You're worth more than that, and don't let anybody tell you that you're not.
And from my experiences, there's been lots of media coverage on gangs, particularly males and their roles in gangs. There's been little light shed on girls and their involvements in gangs and their part to play. Do you feel that girls are just involved in gangs as young men and young boys are?
I've only spoken to one like former female gang member, so I don't really feel like I'm best placed to like talk about their experiences or how rife it is. I know from like a lot of the stuff that's put out there, it's always this assumption that girls aren't there because of choice, but they're there because they're being coerced. But I'm sure it's like a lot more complicated than that, and at the end of the day, like, you fall into the same situation for the same reasons. But yeah, I don't really know enough about that.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Richie on the beat.